won't be part of the video. So good morning, everybody, and here we are.
Good morning.
Week
Morning.
57. Good group this morning, all on the screen. Amazing technology. We are continuing our study in the Gospel of John, week 57, as already stated. And today we're going to focus in on one verse, verse 18. And it's just a jam-packed verse of meaning, and I thought it would be good to kind of build some background on that verse. And so before we get there, let's look at the review. We've looked at how John, in John's gospel account, in the beginning of chapter 5, I used the term teleport. He teleports the activity of the disciples from Galilee to Jerusalem. And there's, I'm sure, a lot that happened in the meantime, but there's a purpose behind all that. John's writing to stress points to his first century readers, and then to us as well indirectly. But there's a healing that takes place in the opening verses of chapter 5 at the Pool of Bethesda. And then there is a what I'm calling a postscript, meaning what I mean by that is it sets the stage for what's coming next. And the postscript in 9b is, and it was the Sabbath. And that sets the stage for the pushback that we've been looking at the last couple of weeks in verses 10 through 16, and that the religious leaders had a real issue with what Jesus did with this man, not the healing in itself, not the what, but the when, because the when was on the Sabbath. And then what I think is he takes, John, the writer, builds to a second postscript because it also sets the stage for verse 18 when Jesus says, my Father is working until now, and I myself am working. So we've already looked at all this, and it just occurred to me I didn't start the slide presentation, so I'm gonna pop through this, and you can see my progression of thought here to verse 17, and now we move to verse 18. So could somebody read those two verses on the screen, 17 and 18?
But he answered them, my Father is working until now, and I myself am working. For this reason, therefore, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he not only was breaking the Sabbath, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
Okay, good. Thanks, Bob. So the progression of point here, what I'm calling is escalated rejection. In verse 16, we saw how the Jewish religious leaders were persecuting Jesus because of his, in their perception, breaking of the Sabbath. Now the same language is used in verse 18. I'm going to change my pen size here and color. For this reason, right here, is the same beginning statement as verse 16. For this reason, therefore, the Jews were seeking to kill him. It moved from persecute to kill. And that's what I want you to see, is that escalation. And this is the first mention in the Gospel of John where this word is used. He's escalated to the point of now the word is out. They're trying to kill Jesus. Because he's not only breaking the Sabbath, but the reason for this escalation, as Bob read to us, was he's calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. It was very clear in their minds what his, what this terminology meant. Morning, Bill.
Morning.
So rejection, escalation, and I'm going to give you some background here. The literal and graphical backdrop for this study in John's gospel account, and what I mean by that is this slide. this slide that I created early on represents the entire series. And so this account is what we call the jungle, this jungle that I introduced weeks ago. The term jungle represents the commonly shared human condition. It is the jungle that Jesus entered through the incarnation in order to restore all things. Our human condition within the jungle is characterized by three destructive human propensities. And this is review. And they're on the slide. There are these little images on the slides, because the idea that within the jungle is permeated by these three, at least three destructive human propensities that we first saw in Genesis chapter 4. And that's where I got these. One is comparison, and that's represented by this idea of the two arrows pointing each other. And we've got this human propensity among all humans to compare of where we are, to profile ourselves in relation to others. And then we take that data and we do things with it. And sometimes it's destructive. There is this idea of resistance coming up against, and just bullheadedness coming up against. It could be a truth. It could be a statement of some it could just be a different idea, but we are characterized as human beings by this resistance to change, if you would. And then dominance is represented by this little graphic where from a position of power, human beings tend to suppress the less powerful. And history has borne that out. So these are three things that I saw out of Genesis chapter 4, and now just transpose those. And this is the context that Jesus is entering, and we see it escalating to a point now in verse 18 where the desire now is to kill him. And so, what we want to do, before I do, I'll read this. Please note, although our focus is on the jungle, this is kind of my disclaimer here, aspect of the human condition, we must remember there is a wonderfully beautiful, two adjectives put together, wonderfully beautiful God genetic shared by all human beings, including all of the created order. It is the God image that has been impaired, that thus requiring the good news of the gospel. So there is this human condition, but there is a majestic side of human beings and a majestic aspect of all of creation that, oftentimes we're overwhelmed with the beauty and the majesty of it. And so what we're up against and what we're a part of is this dichotomy and this really a juxtaposition of these two ideas, and thus the context of the jungle. So, that's where we're at. That's really broad strokes. We have seen how these three destructive human propensities have informed the opening verses of John's gospel account. And first of all, we saw where in verse 4 of chapter, or 5 rather, the light shines into the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And I interpreted that as the light is existing and shines into the darkness, and I'm interpreting comprehend as receiving. The darkness refuses to receive the light. And that's my interpretive view of that for what it's worth. I'm not alone in that, but that's the position I take. Closely thereafter, in the gospel, John continues with, he came, meaning the pre-incarnate word. he came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. John 1:11. And what I was trying to show in the early days of this study was God has been on the pursuit of relationship from the get-go. That he came in numerous ways to his people, to the people of the earth. And there's a constant state of rejection. And so that's what I taught at that point. Later on, the call to receive continues throughout these opening chapters. Jesus comments on the difficulty of this challenge when he states in John 4:4, a prophet has no honor in his own country. Here, in bigger terms, indirectly, the maker of all creation, the God who seeks and has above and all things seeking relationship is not given a place of honor in his very own country. Thus, a way of stating this universal condition of mankind of rejection. And now we see it escalated here in verse 5. So overall, where we're at is that, as stated here, and it's now in a sense of coming to a climax where the Jewish religious leaders of the day, his very own people, are now intent on killing him, Jesus. And all of this is due to what I call an impaired ability to receive. We've got this issue that's part of of our world and part of all that has always been. It's impaired. It has the inability to receive, or an impaired ability, rather. And so here in chapter 5, John builds this rejection motif that's in the first 5 chapters to a climax, which will remain throughout the book. And it will culminate with the passion narratives beginning in chapter 12. So first mentioned here in chapter 5, and this idea now is going to be, it's escalated, if you can see me, ramped up, pinnacled here in 5, and now it's going to build even more this idea of pursuit Jesus to kill him. And that'll, of course, culminate with the passion narratives. And so here we have it. Now going back to where we started at the beginning, seeing chapter 5 in context, the act of healing, the postscript, the pushback, the postscript second, and then finally, maximum rejection here in by 5:18. So that's how I see verse 18. Now, why? Before I move on, side note, I think it's interesting that John uses a miracle, the miracle at Bethesda, as the catalyst for this ultimate rejection stated in verse 18. And the reason I say that is miracles by very nature challenge conventional frameworks of thinking. And the idea behind this is that we as human beings want to control our reality. We want everything in the box. Well, God is not contained in the box. So wherever one has an encounter with the Almighty God, there's a high likelihood it's going to challenge and be outside the box. And herein, a miracle by very nature is something that challenges that box. And so that's why I think that now when Jesus is now being confronted by these guys, what they're being confronted with is their own box. And when it comes to matters of God, we have to be able to let go of that in order to move on in our understanding of God, that box, how we frame God. So, why did the religious leaders reject Jesus? Okay, so the first century religious environment did not lack for gods to worship, just like today. The issue was not so much does one believe in God, but rather which God should I follow? If therefore it is up to one to choose which God, then you'd want to naturally pick one that is the best one, the most powerful one, and the one which would provide the best deal to you. Okay, so I'm just casting this as the social and religious environment of the day. At this point in our story, the general public would have looked at the Jewish God Yahweh with curiosity. The devout sincerity practiced by his followers was impressive. However, the question on the street was, why would I want to follow a God who has such a hard time fulfilling his promises to his people? You know, the word on the street would have been, this is the promised land. Well, then why have you been occupied for centuries, and why hasn't God given it to you? You know, this raises real questions. You see, to the general public, it was not a matter of being monotheistic versus polytheistic. They wouldn't give a rip about the theological correctness. It was about what works and where is the best deal for me. And in their minds, Yahweh, God, seems a bit slow in helping his followers. So the Jewish religious leaders operated from a deep valued tradition, deeply valued tradition, as stated within the Torah, which most of the world did not share. Public opinion was mixed. They were fully aware of this mixed public bias, causing, this is key, this is really key, not because I'm saying it, because it's key, causing them to do what we as humans within the jungle do. And that is, we entrench our position down to deep bedrock. We are the ones doing it right. We tend to entrench, they are entrenching their position because of this perceived threat out there. In verse 5, 1-9, they see Jesus performing an act which they perceive as in violation of their we got it right construct. And we look at it, we almost laugh. Where are your heads, guys? Well, it was no laughing matter to them. They felt he was in violation of what God's will was, and they reacted harshly. Once violation is on their screen, they lose the ability, notice there, lose the ability to see it in any other way, just like we do. They are operating from their most primary instinctive resource, which I call, not me alone, but lizard brain. They go into self-survival, hunker down, bunker mentality, and it's known, I forget which part of the brain, but it's the lowest operating self-survival mode, and they're operating from that mode, lizard brain. So when they hear Jesus stating that my Father is working and I too am working in verse 17, they interpret that through their fear-enacted lens of comparison. Now that comparison is going back to this human propensity. What they're seeing is, what is he saying? What do we believe? and there's this comparison going up, and how they interpret that a comparison is competition. They're stating the way they read Jesus in this statement is competition, that Jesus is competing with Yahweh God. And thus the phrase, he is making himself equal with God. It wasn't a theological enlightenment of the Trinity, of the second person of the Trinity. That is so far off their radar. It was a competition to Yahweh God. No wonder they blew their gaskets. And they would have responded, that just can't be. We got to fix this. He's got to be stopped. He's got to be removed. There is no other way. Absolutely not. We can't have a competing God. So there they go. We read this and we say, in no way is Jesus claiming to be in competition with Yahweh. On the contrary, Jesus is stating ultimate interdependence with his heavenly Father. What is meant to be a state of interdependence and relationship is perceived as competition. Now, we understand this because we were born in the 20th century. We're reading this statement 2,000 years and several church councils dedicated to debating this very subject of the Holy Trinity later. So we have an advantage. They did not have that. To them, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. That was their, and still is their mantra, for lack of a better term, to this very day. You know, Dave Brown could probably comment on that. The Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. So what the point of today is, gee, how garbled things can get, how garbled things got, and how garbled things can get. Now, for our table time, we're right on time. Guys, this thing about us, about needing to be right, to holding the correct position, has killed us. And it continues to do so, to base our fellowship on this idea of being right. Here we have the example out of John chapter 5, these theologically very, very astute guys who were not out to destroy people's lives, interpreted Jesus as a threat to Almighty God, which by his very act is not intended that way at all, but is pronouncing an interdependent relationship. And in so doing, they enact this fear is enacted, and they function out of their lizard brain. From this point on, they're planning to kill Jesus. So let's snap the picture, the screen, this human need to be right. And what we want to talk about in our breakout rooms this morning is, what, if any, experience do you have with this? Oh, man. I hope we have some good stories. So anyway, I'll break you guys up and have a good time, and we'll get back together in about 25 minutes or so. So if I can find my menu here. See you in a bit. Breakout rooms, okay.
Snap.
See you in a, let's see. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, got to start them. Start breakout rooms.
You the boss.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Trouble is remembering from one week to the next. Okay, we're going to start open or. Well, guys.
The drama of anticipation.
Yeah. Oh. I think I had.
I think it's a lesson in how we want to be unified, and you're trying to break us up.
Yeah, don't do that.
Which is often the case.
Yeah.
I failed to click the right button. Here we go, guys. Okay. Oh, Dave. Come. Hey, Dave. Huh. Oh, he's in there.
Why can't Buddhism or Hinduism or any other religion, why can't they be right as well? And my thought is that if I didn't think it was right, why would I be following it fervently? So I have to say to them, I can't follow a relationship with Christ if I don't think that it's right. You know, and in
That's good.
so doing, then you have to say that the other ones are not right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a common struggle that exists out there. You know, we don't see it from their lens. We think our lens is the only right lens. They need to be looking at the way we look at it.
Yeah, and I'm not defending the religious leaders, but they were coming from the same framework. They were convinced that the things they were doing, the laws they were following, were correct. And when somebody came in to challenge it, they put up the shield, and we do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I would, in that subject, you know, a couple I was collaborating with on the scientific paper, we would talk at night at the things you're not supposed to talk about, like religion, finances, whatever kind of a thing. And they were avowed atheists, okay? Very, very, both of them very, very prominent in science. And so there was all this logic. So that to them, it was totally illogical, my belief, okay, in Christ, okay? And so I said, well, what do you believe? What do you think happens to you And I was shocked because they just felt that after they died, it was all dark. I'm going, where's the hope in that? They had no hope for anything after death. So it's, that's what I had. And then he kind of came around a little bit and went from being a total atheist to being an agnostic. And he believed that Jesus, was really, really good. He really admired Jesus. He knew a little bit about scripture and whatever, and so he'd say, well, yeah, Jesus, he's a good guy, that kind of a thing. I'd say, yeah, but that he said that he was God, and he went, what? So he just knew enough, I think, about the scriptures to be dangerous. So, but at least what it was, the chairman of the department was working on him too. The chairman was a Christian too. So they were he was kind of working on him also. So he made some progression from being an atheist to an agnostic. So.
Some of you may remember probably five years ago, I was going through a real struggle in my church, and I was in a pretty significant leadership position. And so there was a lot of internal struggle between fellow believers. I mean, no question that people that we were engaged with, I don't question a bit, but what they were saved people. And I can remember one night, one-on-one with one of our pastors. It was kind of around midnight, I think it was, and I was strongly holding to a position that I held and didn't want to compromise on. And the pastor said, one of the things I've learned is that I need to be able to add to my vocabulary, but I may be wrong. Okay.
Yeah, that's
but I may be wrong, and always leave room for people to. It's not an either or, that you've got to be able to hear what the other person is saying, and to not be repulsed by a different view, but to engage. And so that I found that to be very helpful to me. It took a lot of angst away from me to be able to get to that point and say, hey, this is what I believe. This is what I think Scripture is saying. But I may be wrong. It's helped me a lot.
Yeah, that's good, Bob. That's wise.
I was also thinking that this whole coronavirus thing and the way particularly it's been politicized here in this country as an example of, one party having to be right as opposed to the other party being wrong, that type of a thing. I don't know what people think about that.
Yeah.
So here in the story, this is really worth pondering, and it pertains to what we're all talking about. The Jewish religious leaders in the day of Jesus, and no, I'm under the assumption they were not out to destroy people's lives. They were out to defend the faith, using a modern evangelical term. They were out to actually advance the tradition of Moses through the Torah. So they were guarding, they were protecting, they were quality control. And the incarnate God comes onto the scene and makes a statement. And they interpreted that as competition to how they perceive God.
Mm-hmm.
And what that tells me is just how pronounced, how pervasive this is. I mean, I read this and I resonate because I know that I carry these categories of right, wrong. But Jesus is coming in and making a statement that doesn't fit in either well, what they're saying is true. What they were saying is true. He was making himself equal with God, but they viewed that as competition. It's just mind-boggling, but yet so relevant to to our experience.
One of the things I thought about, Mike, and we're watching this show called The Chosen. If you haven't seen it,
Yeah.
it's on YouTube. It is awesome.
Huh.
But what I was thinking of is Israel went through these periods where they followed other gods. They followed Baal. They followed Asherah and all that, which I didn't understand because there was no really result from following those gods other than they kind of remained in power, or they were enabled to do whatever things they wanted to do, and not call them sinful because they were following this God. But my thought was, when Jesus claimed to be equal with God, the challenge to them was that there was proof that he was equal with God, including this miracle that he had just performed. If he were ineffective in everything he was saying and all of it was just words, then they would not have been challenged, and I don't think they would have reacted as vehemently as they did. But because they just seen him do the exact same thing that God does in healing this paralytic, and in the Chosen, it was the paralytic that was lowered into the house through the roof that challenged them as well, because he forgave sins, and only God can forgive sins. So what they're seeing is that this man claiming to be God is doing the same things as God.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we've got to push back. He's challenging our God, and that's why I think they were so fervent, and why it went from we need to shut this guy up to we need to kill this guy.
Yeah.
I
you're
think
right.
also there was probably and maybe a rejection on my part, but it was actually a challenge to their power. Okay, in terms of being what you would, the Pharisees and kind of the governing, or the power structure in terms of maintaining the Jewish tradition. So I think there was a human element of their power being challenged.
Yeah.
And I think there's
Well, I think so too. I do think that, and that it had a major role, although they probably were not consciously aware of that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they cast that need for control into, well, this is right.
Yeah.
Well, who says it's right? We do.
Well, and I think there's a little bit, and I'm trying to equate it to how I feel at times in my own life, is that we get settled, we get comfortable, and when somebody challenges that comfort, we push back. So this man is coming in, and he is doing things that is going to take away the comfort. Part of what they were claiming he was doing was that he was going against Rome, and he was causing a what's the word I'm looking for? He was disturbing the peace. And I think a lot of times in my own life, even if something is true, if it disturbs my peace, if it makes me feel uncomfortable, then I push back. And I think that's
Yeah,
what they're
exactly.
Good. Yeah, it's a good point.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the time, Jeff, at least from my experience, I don't have language for that. I don't think in terms of, oh, this is happening to me. All
Right.
I'm reacting from my lizard brain
Yep.
of survival, and dig in and hold my position and talk louder. Oh,
Yeah, whoever's the loudest wins the argument, right?
yeah. This is has bearing on the story, and we know the story. How God incarnate deals with this issue of the jungle, where he gives himself, the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, to serve, and to give his life. So in the midst of this bunker mentality, the example before us is giving it all away. This giving over control, giving over one's life. Huge story.
When getting back to the Chosen, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was funny that how they treat Nicodemus and his character, and at the time that Jesus and his disciples are getting ready to trek off and go through Samaria, Nicodemus is hiding behind the wall and crying and wanting to step out and go with him. And Jesus says, you came so close. And everybody's like, what? You know?
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was so neat. And even though I think Nicodemus, as one of the leaders of the church in the Sanhedrin, he did not, he wanted to believe, and he did not really want to be part, he was not part of the crowd that was calling for Jesus to be terminated. He wanted to go, but he could not get that last step past. Now, in the end, I think he did. But at this point, he was like, oh, I want to go, but I can't. I'm in this leadership position. So there's things that, even though he's not pushing forcibly back, that was an obstacle. That was a barrier that he couldn't get past. How could I have been wrong this whole time? Kind of thing. I'm a teacher, and I can't admit that this guy is right, and that I believe that this guy is equal with God. And I think that, like Tatsi was saying with his friends, some people, they get right to the door and they go, no, I can't believe that, and they lose out.
I have good, again, Jeff, you've got so many great things to say. You always do. I have been meditating on that very thing. And I think that the getting to the edge and then failing is actually the catalyst that moves us through when we're ready to move through. It's the failure. It's not the victory. It's the failure that is used by God for the healing to move us ahead.
Right.
So anyway, I'm gonna buzz out and get you guys back, and we'll.
That speaks to how important a core of humility is. How important.
Oh, you're the first back.
Yeah.
No show up here. That was a fast 60 seconds. Did you leave on your own, or did it?
No, I clicked on the bar that it had to return to meeting. So.
Oh, okay, I didn't know you had that. See, I don't see that. So you clicked it and then you got out.
Yeah.
The other guys, there's a timer that starts for 60 seconds.
Yeah, actually, I don't know why mine comes up with that. It comes up every time we go into those breakouts.
Well, maybe the other guys have it too, but we should start. Here we go. We got the guys coming back. Hey, guys are coming back. Hey, the real John White showed up.
I'm in there.
Well, guys, what a what an interesting story. Oh my goodness. What did you guys talk about?
Who's right and who's wrong?
Yeah, I'm
We
always right.
established that Dave has always been right, so he's never had a problem with it.
Yeah, that's right. Now,
I'll let Vincent talk for it. I mean, Dick and I and Vincent are together, but Vincent kind of opened the door pretty wide for experiences of being a butthead, you know.
Which we all have experience in. You have
Well,
to
the first
put
thing
that-
I thought of when we were talking about the question of having to always be right was, we live with our spouses. so what do I need to say?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's the end of that conversation.
Yes,
Oh.
dear.
Vince, what words of wisdom somebody identified you? I think Bill did. So tell us what your thoughts are.
Well, what I shared was a kind of an embarrassing moment. I guess it was when I was raised Roman Catholic, and I converted, I suppose, to Protestantism, and I went from the whole mystery sacramentum kind of belief system to sola scriptura, and the Bible was everything, and every word meant something, and it was important research and all that. But when my sister's first child was born, she, as a Roman Catholic and Italian, wants her brother to be the godparent. And I thought I was taking a big stand for God and defending the faith by refusing to be the godparent, because part of the litany is to affirm that you're going to raise this child as a Roman Catholic, in the absence of the parents, should the need be. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. I can't stand there and say I'll do something I know I'm not going to do. And it hurt my family. And I'm embarrassed to say that it was a terrible thing that I did. I mean, it was just, in my age now, I realized that I was being a jerk. I thought I was right.
Right.
I thought I was doing what God's will
That's
was.
a tough one, yeah.
I thought I was taking a stance on the truth, but I was being unloving. I was just going against the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. I was pushing people away like they don't matter. That the only thing that does matter is I'm right, and I can show you chapter and verse where it says I am, and your feelings don't matter to me, and the love that you have for me doesn't matter to me. And I was being an idiot. I was 20. I guess that was an excuse, but I try hard not to do that anymore.
Well, I just say, raise your hand if any of us weren't idiots at the age of 20.
Oh, that was the wrong way to praise it.
To that end, Dick, there's times in the recent past where I'm just walking along just for a walk or something and reflecting back to one of those instances you're talking about, and I blurt out openly, what on earth were you thinking?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I've had that same thing.
the answer is you weren't thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Listen,
take it.
Actually, when you do think back like that, at least when I do, I almost can't go there because I'm so embarrassed by different things, being an idiot.
Well, meeting Jesus when you haven't met him is such a powerful thing, and it redefines your bedrock. And when you meet Jesus, you also bring along with them all the trappings of the people of the group that you met Jesus through. And they become as important as Jesus himself in terms of not wanting to shift that bedrock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in our group, one of the things we talked about is, and I took a different tack on this, is that many times we find ourselves trying to defend our faith. And my thought was, sometimes you have to be right. if I did not believe fervently that Christ was the way and that other religions were off base, then I would not defend it like I do. So, people will ask you, how can you think that your religion is right when all these other religions are good and that sort of thing? But we are called to defend it. And why would I follow it so fervently if I didn't believe it was right? If I were milquetoast and just mealy mouth about my faith, then I might say, oh, these, you can do whatever you want, and these are just as good, and they're right. You guys follow that, but I'll follow mine. But that's not what we're called to do as Christians. We are to defend our faith. So there are times when we have to say, I am right. And not be afraid to do that.
So maybe a different way to say the same thing, though, and it's a significantly different way, is to say God is right, and to understand God is right. And this is kind of the discussion we had, and that is, God says that the other ways aren't valid. That's why they aren't valid. If God said, fine, whichever way you want to go works, then that would be valid. But it isn't valid because God didn't say that. And so, and that's the key. Like for my own discussion, basically, there's been many struggles. And to me, the discussion is over as soon as someone says, I don't care what God has to say about it, I'm right. Then they just lost. The discussion is over and they're wrong. And basically that's the, I think, a very key point, because in this particular section where we're reading, even, it wasn't a question of whether, hey, what did God really say? We know God is right. How does this fit in? It was, we are right. It doesn't matter. And we're going to punish you even to death if we can, because you're not walking by what we think is right rather than what God thinks is right. And you see the opposite in Acts when they, create the first disciples officially, so to speak. The apostles are saying, hey, we need to get into God's word to figure this out. And we need to focus so much. We need other people to take care of some of these peripheral things. But it was not about which apostle was right. It was about God is right. How do we walk with God? And how do we keep everyone walking with God? So anyway.
So how many heartbreaks and arguments could have been avoided if I wasn't such a knuckle brain back in the day, right? Right? I mean, this one issue is like the biggest thing. And thank goodness as we get older, we lighten up a little bit. But yeah. Jeff, you're right, Jeff. On the one hand, we got to defend what is right. But on the other hand, we really need to remember what's important. And I think Jesus was really just blasting everybody out of their comfort zone. And one thing he was saying is that when we talk about our faith, I think we think of it as being 90% intellectual, what we think and what we believe. And I think Jesus is flipping that around and saying, no, that's a piece of it, but it's really much bigger than this, right? Lighten up on this Sabbath idea, lighten up on right? He was breaking through to say there is much more to the faith than an intellectual being right experience. But anyway, that's
right.
Corinthians screams that out to us. That I hear you, Jeff, but it's kind of like these conferences they had for a while called Simply Jesus, was trying to get back to a core thing that was right and understand how much of what we think about that core thing is more interpretive than we dare admit.
Yeah. Well, and I think he's right in the fact that he challenges their comfort, but they would not have been challenged if Jesus were all words. If he were just saying, I am equal with God, and had no proof. But when John asked his disciples, who is this guy, or is this guy the Messiah? or they went to Jesus and asked that question. He said, "The lame are walking, the blind see." He had proof that he was actually doing the work of God and not just saying, "I am equal with God." And that's what really challenged him, because if he had no proof, that would not have caused them to so vehemently defend their faith or their position.
Well, actually, there's one other thing there too, and that is they had proof that they weren't. And that's what made them mad, because the condition in Israel was a natural result. God had told them, if you don't walk with me, you will suffer these consequences. And they were suffering those consequences, which means they weren't walking with God. It's that simple. So then to have God come along, Jesus, and fulfill all of those things, it's like as sharp of a contrast as you can make,
Right.
which is why their response is, we've got to kill him, which is as sharp of a contrast as they can make. Right? So, anyway, good point.
Well, fellas, it's 8:00, and thank you for thought-provoking comments today. You guys are all very wise. Nice to listen in and hear what you have to say. Dick Schilling is proposed, or Dick Cook, June 3rd back at the Moot. We're a ways away from that. What I'll need to do is contact the Moot House, talk to Jen, and come up with a plan of re-emerging. And but thank you to Mike Melander for bringing it to my radar this morning. It was, I hadn't even thought about that, but it sure would be nice to get back in a safe, controlled manner. So anyway, have a good week, and we'll see you guys on Zoom next week.
And Mike, before you shut off, I'm going to be up at North Dakota now for about 3 months, and the meeting times overlap such that I won't be able to even attend Zoom meetings. So I'm going to miss this enormously unless you record it, which you do.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys in September.
Oh, Bill,
Have
we're
a
going to
great
miss
summer, Bill.
That time of year, huh?
Yeah, that time.
Well,
Time to migrate.
Has everybody been warned?
Have a good summer. See you in September.
Has everybody been warned that you're going to be up there now for the rest?
Not yet. I don't want them to know. No.
I'll send out a blast email.
Yeah. Love you. I love you guys. See you.
We're going to miss you, Bill. Have a good summer.
Good to be missed.
Bye for now, guys.
Michael.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Mike.